Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to continue to look at Jesus as the light of the world in our ongoing series on the life of Christ. John chapter 9, verse 1, as he passed by, he's in Jerusalem, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind?" Now, this is part of an ongoing series. We've been looking at Jesus as the light of the world. I think we're still looking at the same topic, even though the chapter has changed and the story changes. And the setting for this is a theological question. They see a man and he's blind, and the thinking back then, you see it all the way back in the days of Job, was that God blesses good people and he curses bad people. And here's someone who had been, I guess we could say, he'd been cursed from birth. He had been blind from birth. And the question is, who sinned to bring about that blindness? Was it he that sinned? After all, he was born blind. He didn't have a chance to do any sinning. Or was it his parents that had done something bad? And Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents. Sometimes bad things happen, and they don't happen for that particular reason. Because you did something bad, then therefore something bad happens to you. It was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. The reason for this man's blindness was so that God could be glorified as Jesus heals this man. After all, because of his blindness, not only will he eventually be allowed to see, not only will he see the power of Christ, but we see the power of Christ 2,000 years later. Verse 4, we must work the works of him who sent me, as long as it is day. But night is coming when no one can work. You see, while you can see, do the things that allow seeing to take place. Night is coming when no one can work. Verse 5, while I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Now this is what he had said in the previous chapter. He's saying it again here. He is the light, and because he is the light, he's going to allow people to see. When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle, and applied the clay to his eyes. It's as though Jesus is going through a ritual. Now, Jesus didn't have to do it. He could have just said, see, and men would have seen. But instead, he goes through a process of making clay, and applying it to his eyes. It sort of reminds us a bit of the creation story back in Genesis chapter 2, when God made man of the dust of the ground. Now, God could have used anything. He could have just said, man be, and man could have. But instead, he used a process. He used materials. And Jesus is doing the same thing here. Verse 7, and he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he goes and washes down in this pool. Now, the pool of Siloam was at the other end of Jerusalem. It was, you went south out of the temple area. You went all the way down through what was the old city of David to the very southern point of that, and that was the pool of Siloam. That's a long journey for a blind man to take. But he went. He went away, and he washed, and he came back seeing. His vision was restored. Now, here we are in the temple, way up north, and notice he's coming way down south to the pool of Siloam. Like I said, that's a long trip. And in the process of washing and then coming back, somewhere along the line, his sight returns to him. Here we are at the pool of Siloam. Actually, we were there just a couple of years after it had been uncovered. Its exact location had been lost for a lot of years. But this was the pool as it was there in Herod's day. The entire pool has not even been excavated yet. It's only about maybe a quarter, not even half of it has been excavated. So back in John chapter 5, we had the healing of a lame man. Here in John chapter 9, we're seeing the healing of a blind man. Back in John chapter 5, that lame man did not necessarily align himself to Jesus afterwards. We don't read of that. Here in John chapter 9, he's going to come back and he's going to become a follower of Jesus, at least for a time. He's going to attach himself to Jesus. In John chapter 5, there's no indication, we're not told either way, of any lasting faith on the part of the lame man who was healed. Here in John chapter 9, he's going to come to faith in Jesus. In John chapter 5, remember the situation? It was involving water too, and he'd been unable to get down into the water, and he thought that maybe that would somehow heal him, and Jesus healed him without the benefit of the water. Here in John chapter 9, he sends him down to wash in the pool of Siloam, and his act of obedience brings about that healing miracle. Therefore, the neighbors and those who previously saw him as a beggar, because he seems to have been a regular fixture, maybe on the steps of the temple, and they were saying, "Is not this the one who used to sit and beg?" And others were saying, "Well, yeah, that's him." But others were saying, "No, he looks like him." But he said, "No, I'm the one. I used to be here blind and begging and unable to care for myself, and now I can see." So they were saying to him, "How then were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man who is called Jesus," now he hadn't seen Jesus, remember, all I did was hear, "but the man who is called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes." See, he went through that process so he could tell what was happening, "and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And so I went away and washed, and I received sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I don't know." And, he couldn't see at the time. And they brought him to the Pharisees. They brought to the Pharisees the man who was formerly blind. Now here's the problem, verse 14. Now it was a Sabbath on the day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Now we've seen this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Here's John's treatment of Jesus healing on the Sabbath. It's a different healing than we read about in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but that's okay. Jesus healed on all sorts of days, including the Sabbath. But that's going to be a problem to the Pharisees. Then the Pharisees also were asking him again how he received his sight. And he said to them, "Well, he applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see." And therefore some of the Pharisees were saying, "This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. After all, there he was doing things with clay. That's like working." But others were saying, "Wait a minute, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And so even among the Pharisees, there was a division among them. Notice how the presence of Jesus, the ministry of Jesus, brings about a division. It's not that he's divisive, it's just that either you believe him or you don't, and that's a world of difference. So they said to the blind man, "What do you say about him, since he opened your eyes?" And the blind man, he says, "Well, I guess he's a prophet." And the Jews then did not believe it of him that he had been blind and had received sight until they called the parents. Well, maybe it's a ringer, maybe it's somebody else. And they called the parents of the very one who had received his sight, and they questioned them, saying, "Is this your son who you say was born blind, and how then does he now see?" Notice they're not even assuming he was really blind. Maybe he was faking. "Is this your son? And you say he was born blind. How does he now see?" And his parents answered them and said, "Well, we know that this is our son, and we know he was born blind, but we don't know about the rest of it. How he now sees, we do not know. Or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him, for he is of age. He will speak for himself." They're bailing out of any answers. They don't want to get involved. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews. Now, that's not all Jews. They were afraid of the Jewish leaders. For these Jewish leaders, the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be the Christ, that is the Messiah, he was to be put out of the synagogue, and they didn't want to be put out of the synagogue, so they're not going to answer. They're not going to get involved. So a second time, they called the man who had been blind and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." And he then answered, "Well, whether he's a sinner, I don't know. The only thing I know, the one thing I do know, is that though I was blind, now I see." That's what I know. That's what I can see that. I can see. I couldn't see before. And I don't know how it happened, but he was there and he did these things. So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he answered them, "I told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again?" It's like they were looking for problems in his story. He says, "You do not want to become his disciples too, do you?" And they reviled him and said, You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, and then they admit, we don't know where he's from. And the man answered and said to them, well, here is an amazing thing, that you do not know where he is from, and yet he opened my eyes. And then the man goes on to comment. He says, we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, then he hears him. And since the beginning of time, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. And if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. That's the reasoning of this blind man. Notice this blind man is starting to see very well. Not just physically, but he's beginning to see spiritually. Verse 34, they answered him, you were born entirely in sins, and are you teaching us? So they put him out. They're of that old school. If something bad happens to you, you must have been in sin. Either you had sinned or your parents had sinned, but there's some sin involved, and therefore we're not going to listen to you. Well, Jesus heard that they had put him out. Chapter 9, verse 35. And finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, well, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? Verse 37, Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you. Notice he had seen Jesus, maybe not physically, but spiritually speaking at least. And now he's speaking to him personally. Verse 38, and he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Notice how the man goes from blindness to seeing, to spiritual seeing, to belief. But it doesn't end there. And it goes finally to worship. He is beginning to see Jesus for who he really is. This formerly blind man can see. And the formerly seen people, the people who could see physically, they can't really see at all. They're as blind as a bat. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind. That's being graphically portrayed before us. Do you see it? Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, we're not blind too, are we? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say we see, your sin remains. You see, if you come to God and say, I see, and you don't see, then he cannot heal you. If you come to him and say, Lord, I need help. I am blind and I need you to open my eyes. I need you to forgive my sins. I need you to change me. If you come to him out of your need, then he opens your eyes. He forgives your sins. He cleanses you. He changes you. And your sin is forgiven.